Good afternoon to you. Mark Seth with HurricaneTrack.com here. Monday now, the second day of October. And with that, welcome to October 2nd, 2023. This month is going to be interesting. We have a little bit of action to start the month with Philippe. We have some action starting to brew in the Eastern Pacific. Been a while since we've had to track anything out that way. And then what happens mid-month and beyond, we'll have to see. A more favorable pattern does look to try to set up. But the question, of course, is, does the weather pattern in reality take advantage of this overall favorable setup and give us something more to track in the Western Caribbean, maybe the Gulf of Mexico, the Southwest Atlantic? I mean, heck, the whole Atlantic is open for business because water temperatures, as you know, are well above the long-term average. They are still there. So we've got a while to go. We've got 2 months left in the hurricane season officially. So we shall see what happens. An interesting time ahead for sure. So let's start and see what's going on out there. Glad you could join me. Let's begin with some climatology. We'll use, I guess, red here to make things pop better. Looking at the month of October, these are the areas that we would typically see development, mainly confined to the Western Caribbean, Southwest Atlantic, the subtropical Atlantic. The deep tropics typically shut down now. The African wave train usually comes to a halt by this time. So we're going to focus more on Central American gyre action over here. Maybe stalled fronts that come down and develop low pressure areas along them. And then other seedlings that can come along from time to time and give us some really big hurricanes in October and even into November, especially when we have the kind of warmth that we do down in this area. Still, that hasn't dissipated. It hasn't been churned up, upwelled, or otherwise mixed. That's where I needed the ED, was mixed, not at otherwise. But you get the idea. This is what it looks like from just a general map perspective and the shaded areas of the number of named storms per 100 years. Another way to look at it is through this, and this goes through 2022, thanks to our good friend of the project, Mr. Howard over there in Bermuda, coded this map for us. Let's take them off just for a second. So this is what it looks like with nothing, and this is the first 10 days of October from 1851 through last year, and you can clearly see, we use blue now to make everything stand out. Yes, there are some deep tropical development areas, so why doesn't that show up over here? And isn't that neat how they almost lined up? Well, I guess there's just not enough for it to typically show up in, it's almost like a heat map, I guess you could say. Not really, but anyway, there are some developments over the past 100+ years, and we can click on these or even mouse over them, and they tell you what they are. This is our interactive map over on the HurricaneTrack Insider site, part of our Patreon access, and pretty cool that you can just go through and see the history, right? But a more concentrated area certainly over here, and the densest concentration in the Western Caribbean, Southern Gulf of Mexico, but lots of subtropical development as well. And let's not neglect the Eastern Pacific. That can stay busy through October. And then let's zoom in over here, and you can tell some of these tracks do end up in Mexico, and even one of them in New Mexico there. Lots of them bringing remnant moisture into Mexico, and that moisture gets into the western and central United States from time to time. Lots of these curves over here, these lines after they have made landfall in the southeast and elsewhere. So yeah, October converse to the, and contradictory to the poem, where it says October all over. I don't remember the rest of the poem, that's fine. I just remember that one point. No, it's not over in October, not by a long stretch. But generally speaking, it does start to wind down, and we're just kind of looking out for that one or two that might form and, affect somebody. And not just the United States, Central America, the Caymans, the Greater Antilles, elsewhere. Yeah, we got you all covered. And today's a great example of that when we start to talk about Philippe here in just a little bit. Again, huge thanks to Howard for coding this up for us. We really appreciate it. A fine tool to look back at history. Now, this is going to be looked at historically because of what it shows. The year of the very warm Atlantic basin overall, the El Niño that came on, and now it has stretched all the way out through the Niño 3-4 area, through the Pacific there. We're going to talk more about what will happen post-hurricane season in a few weeks, maybe towards the end of the month. You know how at the end of the NCAA tournament, the ESPN people come up with a way too soon or way too early look at the top 25 for the next season. It's kind of a fun thing that they do. Well, I take the weather pretty seriously, but I think at the end of October, we'll start looking ahead to things to look for next year. And the reason, and I'm kind of hinting at it now, I'm already seeing some chatter about the Atlantic and its configuration, the El Niño dissipating next year. I don't want to get too far right now, but there could be some really, really big implications going into 2024, and especially with the other stuff that's going to happen in 2024. Oh boy, what an exciting year coming up weather-wise it does look like for next year. But we're still in this year, and I got to be very careful. You don't want to look ahead. Also, in basketball and other sports, you don't want to look ahead when you're in the current. You know, don't look to the next game. You're right here, right now. So let's focus on that. But notice there's just a few little things here. This little small areas of yellow, these little transverse, they're almost like instability waves. I guess that's kind of what they are. Just a little small set of areas where the water temperatures are cooling down a little bit. We've lost all the deep reds, almost to the black color. But the overall, it's kind of like taking a huge, this is a great way to think of it, a big old lump of butter. I'm dead serious. And then you spread it out over, I don't know, a huge piece of garlic bread or something. And so it's not as thick like we saw earlier in the summer with all those positive anomalies over here. Everything's been kind of spread out across the tropical Pacific. And so you're not concentrating those ridiculous positive anomalies in the eastern Pacific anymore. It's more distributed and not as ridiculous, but we are in a moderate to strong El Niño just looking at sea surface temperatures. There are other things that we look at, and there's some indicators that we're really not in a strong El Niño. That gets into a lot of, the weeds of it all, and I don't want to get into it too much here, but we do have an El Niño, and it does look like it'll peak in the winter and then die away next year. And we still have this very warm Atlantic relative to average. Notice, too, these areas that were carved out by the likes of Franklin and Lee and other activity in the subtropics, those have filled in pretty quickly. It just goes to show you the staying power of the warmth of the Atlantic basin. Now, a majority of that warmth is concentrated over here now, and lucky for you and my presentation, I've got a nice close-up of that area, thanks to the folks at NOAA and their products that allow us to do this. So look at these anomalies through here, still very warm compared to the long-term average all across the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, southeastern Pacific, even off the map to the left there. So this is why we can't just give up and say, oh, nothing's going to happen. Even a well-developed gyre that forms around Central America, maybe it's more in the eastern Pacific and it sends these impulses around it. You can get very heavy rain events affecting Jamaica, parts of Cuba, the Caymans. Remember, you don't have to have a named storm or even a depression to give you big problems from very, very heavy rain. Think about what happened in New York Friday. That was from a non-tropical system. That was not a named storm. Now, a big part of that, of course, is all the building up and the infrastructure and mankind's footprint on the landscape, helping to exacerbate things. But it still happened, and that was just rain, a very disruptive rain event. So to my point about how warm things are, the Gulf of Mexico, I love the color scheme. It's very bright and vibrant, and it really helps to delineate these isotherms, these lines of equal temperature. Only up here in the Big Bend area are we starting to really cool things off, but even there, we're still talking 80, it's got to slow down to 81 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 27, 28 Celsius at a minimum. I mean, there's a little 27 sitting in there, and it is cooling off. We're getting some decent cool nights in fall weather. But the rest of the Gulf of Mexico, generally 29 to 30 and even 31 Celsius out here, which we're still talking mid to upper 80s. So yeah, we still have a ways to go, and until we get a nice front to come down and really clear things out with that cold air advection. This is typically how those fronts do approach. That's a terrible arrow there, but that's all right. The Gulf's going to take a while to cool off, or you get a hurricane to come through and cool it off that way. You know, those are just different mechanisms. So just pointing out, we are still very warm in the old Gulf of Mexico. All right, in the Atlantic Basin, looking at the satellite imagery, I believe this is smoke all through here. Looking at some of the stuff I've been seeing from Ben Knoll and others, yeah, that's still going on. I think that's smoke. The wildfires in Canada still bringing that smoke down into parts of the western Atlantic and eastern North America. But let's focus on this down here. That's Philippe. There's the low-level center. Somewhere around here is Rena. Not even sure where exactly, to be honest with you. Lots of strong upper-level winds. You can see those streaking by here. And we're going to do a close-up here of Philippe in just a minute. And you'll understand the wind shear affecting it. Strong upper-level winds cutting this way. And pretty dry air still coming off of Africa. As I said, the African wave train. I mean, there's a tropical wave there. They're not gone, but they are weaker overall. They'll come off at a lower latitude. And that can be problematic, too. The ones that do survive and that are still there, they can work their way over, interact with any Central American gyre activity, and you could get trouble. That's how that works, usually. And then I thought I had a close-up. Wait a minute. Let's see. Yes, I do, right there. But I forgot to show this. So this is like the broad satellite. Here's the Hurricane Center homepage. There's Philippe. Barely holding on right now overall, even though winds are still about 50 miles per hour in the deeper convection. But it is, look at the headline, forecast to cause heavy rains and flooding over portions of the Leeward Islands through today. It says later today because this was 2 p.m., so about an hour and some change ago, right? But yeah, still impacting that area. But I also want to show you the Pacific, because here's the 2-day outlook, but then as we expand to the 7-day outlook, as I was mentioning, a couple of areas here starting to come to life as the pattern becomes more favorable generally throughout this region over the coming weeks. A favorable upward motion pattern, maybe some of this gyre activity where you get these westerly winds at the low levels coming this way, your trades still coming through this way, and you just get this broad turning going on down here. And sometimes that can pinch off, and you get cyclones that develop. And because they're in the tropics, they are warm, and we call them tropical cyclones. Makes sense, right? So here is Philippe, and look at that. Very, very well-defined low-level center there. Not too far from Barbuda and Antigua here. There's Guadeloupe, where the heavier thunderstorms and rain and whatnot, gusty winds, that's where that's occurring. And that's going to be a problem as this hangs out fairly slowly moving over the next couple of days. You can see the wind shear, strong upper level winds coming across, blowing these tops away. So it's not able, Philippe isn't, to wrap that convection around itself. But even as exposed and kind of ugly as it is, so to speak, it's close enough, as we can see on the tracking map here, our interactive map, it's close enough to this area that you're going to have some problems, even over towards the Virgin Islands in the coming couple of days, perhaps. Maybe. We'll have to see how that convection moves or wraps around. But even in the shallower areas of, let's go back to this, even here where there's not much convection, you can still get a quick burst of heavy rain, and you just never know when the shear is going to let up and deep thunderstorms form right over your area. So just looking at a close-up here, Guadeloupe, Dominica, down to Martinique, that's where the heavier thunderstorms are, but up at Antigua and Barbuda, and then eventually, potentially, as this moves on, if that convection starts to fire up and wrap around, we could have some heavier rain and gusty winds. I mean, when these things ramp up right on top of you, you notice it. And we just have to be ready for that down here in the Northeast Caribbean. And as you can see, the forecast is eventually for Philippe to become a hurricane. Now, I will say this. You remember in the videos last week, we were talking about the GFS maybe scoring a major victory, figuring out the whole configuration of what was going to happen with Rena and Philippe. Part of it, it got right that Philippe would end up victorious. Rena is now a remnant low. It's gone. But the GFS was way over aggressive For whatever reason, I'm sure we could go back and analyze it and figure out its error, or errors plural since it did it run after run. But the operational was way too aggressive in developing Philippe into a strong hurricane down here and then sending it out into the North Atlantic. That looks like it'll happen later, the fact that it would become a hurricane at all once it gets into the subtropics. A weird situation, a little bit. I mean, in an El Niño year and late in the season, probably not too unusual to get strong winds down there that don't let these things develop. But if it's going to become a hurricane, it looks like it would do so later in the forecast period. So the GFS kind of right that Philippe was victorious, but very, very much on the aggressive side when it came to the intensity. So in the Eastern Pacific, just to show you this, there's that large area of turning down here, and just the general pattern of favorable low-level flow. And interesting there, a little gyre trying to form there, then it dissipated. Small cyclonic turning. In the Gulf of Mexico, just a few areas of convection here and there. Nothing organizing. But we've got to see, does this pattern here come over to the east a few hundred miles or so later in the month and start to set up over here? That typically is what happens during a season, especially as the season ages and gets towards the end of it, mid-October and beyond. So we'll have to wait and see, because the overall pattern is favorable out here. We're going to get one and then two developments, it looks like, in the Eastern Pacific, and that could spill over eventually into the Atlantic. So let's take a look at the models here. This is the GFS, the somewhat reliable GFS, right? There's Philippe down there. Nice, beautiful area of high pressure over the eastern United States. I'll just throw a surface high for you right there. And it's toasty in the eastern U.S. Going to flip, though. We'll talk about lower 48 weather once we get to November more and more as we look ahead to winter. And then a large area of, this is cyclonic flow up here, a couple of vorticity centers there, and then the fractured Bermuda Azores high sitting out here. And then I already pointed out Philippe. So let's see what happens in the low levels over the next few days. Something weird. I did look at this ahead of time. So look, like, what is this? Where does this little thing right here come from? And then watch what happens with it. This is 3 days out. And if we keep going to 4 and 5, like Philippe gets going and then something else gets going and merges with a big strong low up over in the vicinity of southeast Canada, north of the Great Lakes region. Philippe gets sort of slingshotted around, or slungshot, or however you say it. I don't know, man. It is such a wacky pattern. It really is. One thing's interesting about this, vorticity, you know, when you look at it, that can, underneath it means rain. So we're going to have another big rain event. We got to pay attention to this. Very warm water sitting out here still, especially over the Gulf Stream. So that is something we are going to need to watch as we approach the weekend. All right, we'll talk about this more as the week progresses. But there's Philippe right there, maybe a hurricane at this point in time. Huge ocean storm, massive, nothing related to the tropics though. Real quick, looking at the euro, because this is also really weird. This is the 24-hour increments. Watch what happens with Philippe down there, right there. Keep your eyes on that. The euro does something, I would say, almost equally as weird. Again, these are every 24 hours. It splits it, and then just like, what? Like, what's going on? Let's see if we've got the 3-hour stuff in enough. Yeah, we do, through at least 132 hours. So let's watch this. Yeah, there you go. So Philippe kind of goes up just east of Bermuda, but like, I don't know what we got going on here. This is very odd. It's just kind of growing a large area of cyclonic, you know, rotation and vorticity out there, energy. Just a weird setup. And this is not even 5 days out, and then it kind of splits it up and then creates something up near Nova Scotia. And then again, there's that energy, more of that vorticity, sort of a front aiming up into parts of New England. It could be wet up there, and this is the weekend, and that aims in and lines up with what we saw on the GFS. So we got to watch. So maybe even some indirect influences from the tropics as Philippe, some of its energy, the moisture, I don't know. I mean, this is a strange pattern, and just part of October, which can produce some strange things because the atmosphere is in transition, leaving summer, heading deeper into fall, right? We're already into fall. We know that. but just weird setups here that we'll have to watch. Howard, you definitely got to pay attention because you could get some heavy rain out of this. We'll see. Very interesting times ahead. Real quick, want to switch back to the GFS and just show you the Eastern Pacific, where we're going to get that development, it looks like, from system number 1 here, then another system over here. Eventually, I just want to keep you guys aware of this in the East Pack in case you have interest out there. Nothing imminent in terms of directly impacting land. There's 7 days right there. But yeah, we do have 1 development and then 2. And then we'll just have to see, does this pattern shift itself more towards Central America and the Western Caribbean as we get later into October and beyond. We'll see. All right, before I let you go, I am going to make this video public later today. Had the awesome opportunity on Friday to have a Zoom session with some of our patrons, with the president and founder and just all-around genius behind Quick Dams, our supporter, sponsor, whatever, partner. I like that word better. And you got to watch it. It's just really, really cool. Carol Dancer, the founder, the president, a wonderful story of her company, all the people that work with her, the technology behind what they're doing, and the whole idea behind mitigating, lessening the effects of water damage. I'll make this interview that we did. It wasn't even an interview. It's a conversation, and we had different people, Karen and others, Javier giving some input and some advice. A company to keep an eye on in the coming years. We'll be working with them hopefully for a long, long time to get the word out about water and how that can impact your life. It's very positive, but it can also turn against you. And it was, again, just a wonderful, enlightening, and energetic conversation with Carol from Quick Dams. And this is a video on YouTube. There's too much going on in my life right now. But yeah, I'll make that public later today. Be sure to check that out. All right, let's get over to the title screen so I can get out of here and get this online for you before I get too tongue-twisted. So yeah, welcome to October. We'll see what happens. We're at the beginning of the month. Once we're towards the end and near Halloween, how will it all end? Well, stay tuned. We'll figure it all out together. That much I can assure you. The other stuff, we'll just have to wait and see in between. Have a good rest of your Monday from all of us at HurricaneTrack. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow.